Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Final hour of today's program. Joining us on the phones right now, good friend of the program, Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report. What's going on today, Scott?
Morning, Chad. We have another congressional retirement. I'm reporting live from the scene of the Shrimp Festival in Galveston. Start wherever you would like.
How was the Shrimp Festival? Was it good?
It's wonderful. It's the I come to this festival every year. It's a tradition. It's the best festival this weekend in Texas.
Wow.
Everyone should check it out.
The Shrimp Festival.
But, you know, there's popcorn shrimp, there's coconut shrimp, there's shrimp and grits, there's gumbo, everything.
Man, that sounds pretty good. That sounds all right. All right, well, I guess we'll start off. You got some folks on social media saying this is not a big surprise, but this, you know, I would think that if you're Republicans, you're not happy with yet another Texas Republican congressional retirement in Mac Thornberry. He's done.
Yeah, he says he's out. I saw an interview he did on, I think, KXAN television in Austin a couple of weeks ago, where he was asked if he was going to seek reelection, and he didn't quite answer the question, which is, I think, one of the reasons people are saying this is not surprising. We have a lot of members of Congress, who are Republicans from Texas who it may just be their time, given, forget about all the other stuff that's going on, Trump and, some of the upheaval going on in Washington, the fact that Republicans are in the minority and all of that. There are some of our Republican congressmen who are probably just tired of being there, Chad. I mean, You can't read too much into it.
Well, I think he was term limited with Armed Forces Chair committee. I mean, that's pretty powerful committee. And if you're term limited as being chair on that, you might look around and go, well, what else is there?
Yeah, right. What's the point? And that was the same for Mike Conaway, by the way, who's also retiring, in his chairmanship or ranking member role in the committee that he's on. If you look at the fact that some of the longevity of these members, is probably running out because of those term limits. They just don't want to be there anymore. It's just not any fun. But I think at some point, Chad, it does start to become sort of drag on Republican morale, because you will see Republican activists and others, and you've seen this with some of the other retirements, and I think you may see it with this one as well. Some of the grassroots folks will say, no, you need to stay and fight the Democrats. This is ridiculous. Why aren't you staying in the fight? They were saying that about Will Hurd down in South Texas and some of the other congressmen who had left, particularly, I think, Pete Olson from the Houston area, and some others. And, folks have started to call this the Texodus, I think, 2 or 3 retirements ago, which may have been premature. But I think once you get into 6 congressional retirements or Republicans from this state, I think it's something that may stick.
Yeah, the area that Thornberry is in, it's pretty red. I don't think there's any
That's right.
any fear of that going over to the Democrat side. It'll just be a pretty heated Republican primary, one would think.
It very well could be. As you know, Pat Fallon, who's a state senator from North Texas, represents parts of the DFW suburbs as well as Wichita Falls. His district, his state senate district, actually overlaps with Thornberry's congressional district. Fallon has been considering running against John Cornyn in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate, but it had been thought that Fallon was also interested in maybe just running for a seat in Congress. You remember when one of the congressmen from DFW, John Ratcliffe, who's from sort of the other side of the Metroplex, when he was considered for Director of National Intelligence briefly, I think for about a week, when that was going on, Fallon was said to be interested in that seat in Congress. Maybe since this one actually overlaps with his Senate district, he'll consider running for this one instead of running against John Cornyn.
Interesting. Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Scott, what is Senator Ted Cruz up to these days?
Isn't it interesting that he's talking about running for president again, not in 2020, but in 2024? He said that just recently. I'd like to run again, I believe was pretty much the direct quote.
Yep.
And in the meantime, over the weekend, you saw that he was talking about the idea that President Trump's activities in relation to Ukraine should be investigated, although he said that Democrats don't have the capacity to do it. Basically, he said that the Democrats are already saying that Trump needs to be impeached, and no matter what the facts show, the Democrats will probably still want to impeach him, so he just questioned whether they're going to be fair in this whole thing. But it's interesting to have a guy say he'd like to be president and say that the current president ought to be investigated. What's up with that? Some people, I had some Republicans texting and calling over the weekend saying, is he positioning, and I guess it's an interesting theory, is he positioning to maybe already be an alternative if President Trump is forced out through this impeachment process, or if he loses, in 2020 because, for a variety of reasons. I mean, you already have someone who's definitely making himself out to be an alternative for Republicans to President Trump. And, of course, we can't forget that Cruz was the last man standing against Trump in the 2016 nominating process. He's the guy who Trump accused his father of, being involved in the assassination of JFK and calling his wife ugly and all that other stuff. So you have to think that privately, at least, he still harbors some animus for the president.
But do you think, his comments over the weekend of, yeah, go ahead, you can investigate. They came across to me, and again, I didn't get to watch it, but they came across to me as, yeah, go ahead if you want to investigate. But I thought it was going to be much worse than it really was, and you're not going to have a leg to stand on. I mean, it almost came across that way instead of Cruz ready for Trump to be under the microscope.
Yeah, it's just a little different from what others have said. I mean, if you look across the Republican landscape, you don't have almost any elected Republican saying that, even in a flippant way, saying that the president ought to be investigated. Instead, what you see is a pretty united front from Republicans saying there's nothing to see here. There is no crime. I mean, if you watch Fox News Channel or any of these others, remember Judge Napolitano on Fox was excoriated by a bunch of the other Republicans for saying that, even if the president had done what he was said to have done, it would be a crime, as all of a sudden people saying, well, he's a never-Trumper and all of that.
Yeah.
Any sort of break with the party line right now is pretty interesting to folks.
I'm visiting with Scott Braddock. Scott, another question that was asked. I guess they've moved on from Beto. The journalists know that Beto O'Rourke's not going to run for the Senate seat against John Cornyn. Which this again shows me that Democrats and even those in the media, they look at the Democrats who have lined up so far against Cornyn and go, none of you guys have a shot. None of you have a shot. Now they're asking Julian Castro, because he's not going to be the Republican or the Democrat nominee for president. They're asking Julian if he's going to drop out and run for Texas Senate.
Well, and whatever politicians say about what they're going to, maybe run for in the future, even if it's pretty close to this time. Whether it be 3 months from now or 6 months from now or whatever, they usually always say, no, I'm running for the thing I'm running for now. Or if somebody's in an office already and you ask them, would you consider running for something higher? Usually they'll say, well, you never rule anything out, but I have the best job in the world right now, right? So they never want to move off of that. Don't want to be perceived as a lame duck either in the office they're in or in the race they're in. And so for Castro or Beto or whoever to say that they would never consider running for U.S. Senate because they're running for president right now, I just don't take that seriously. At least I always take it with a grain of salt because they're always going to leave it out there as an option, no matter what they say, even if what they say is pretty definitive. And it's always pretty easy to explain that, right? I mean, if you have, for example, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, when he was a state senator, he had been asked many times if he would run against Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, and he always said that he would absolutely not do that. In fact, Patrick had said, all the way up until the day that he announced he was going to run against the lieutenant governor, he had been assuring David Dewhurst that he would never run against him until he did. And, of course, the explanation was, and this is a typical explanation from a politician, people were asking me to run, Chad. I can't ignore the people. It was more of a recruitment thing. They wanted me to run. Also, the Speaker of the House, Dennis Bonnen, remember last summer, he was saying, I'm not a candidate for speaker, and I never will be, right? And then there was an outpouring of support. All of a sudden there was this groundswell, and there were House members who needed him to run, and so suddenly he was in the race. So that's one of the things that's always easy for any politician to explain. And I think to your point, so far, a lot of folks are not all that impressed with, even though there are some talented folks in that field, but people who are not well known. Royce West, the state senator from Dallas, Amanda Edwards, a city councilwoman from Houston, MJ Hager, who ran for Congress. These folks who are in the field trying to vie for the nomination to run against Cornyn, still not well known. And Julian Castro and Beto O'Rourke are well known, no matter what people think of them. They at least have some name ID, and of course O'Rourke is battle tested in a statewide race in Texas where he did pretty well. Let's give him a little bit of credit, although he's made some changes in the way he's running for president, changes to his campaign, and changes to some of his positions on issues, which might be a liability for him if he was to come back. But I don't put a lot of stock in it, Chad, when anybody says, I'm never going to run for whatever. I wait until they do.
Yeah. Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor Corn Report. Scott, I was in D.C. last week.
Yeah.
And
made it back okay.
Yeah. Well, I saw the hazmat suit on.
The 100% Democrat ball cap you were wearing.
That was Photoshop, and it was actually they put that on my head when I got to D.C. They're like, "Welcome to Washington. Here's your new hat." One of the questions that I got, it was a bunch of talk radio hosts, about 60 to 70 talk radio hosts, and I had so many of them who came up to me once they realized I was from Texas.
Yeah.
And they were like, what is going on in Texas? Is Texas really going blue? And they had heard about the lieutenant governor talking about, the gun issue. Some people had even heard about this little tape, though some people thought sex was somehow involved on the tape. And then when they heard it wasn't, they're like, oh, that's not a scandal. Come on. But people were really wondering, is Texas going blue? And it seems to be a very, from people who are outside of the state, they're wondering what's really going on. I mean, have you heard of? Have you gotten that as well when you travel out of state, when you talk to people who are outside of Texas?
Absolutely, tons of questions. People want to know if it's turning blue. I tell them that it's more competitive, and I think there's a difference, and here's why. And I think you may agree with this. In the Trump era, what it means to be conservative has been sort of scrambled on the board. I think a lot of the positions that the president has taken are different, I think it's fair to say, from what has been thought of as traditionally conservative. And so I think conservative Republicans in Texas are a little bit different breed from what you would find in Washington right now, in a lot of respects. I think in Washington, a lot of it is about, and this goes right to the impeachment discussion, are you with President Trump or not? We were talking about this on our podcast this weekend, the Texas Take podcast, which is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and anywhere that you enjoy your podcast. But it's more about being anti-Trump or pro-Trump right now at the national level. And a lot of that trickles down to Texas, right? I mean, think about the fact that Senator Cornyn is now pretty much backed in a corner for being pro-Trump, right? He's part of Republican leadership. He's out there making speeches about how the impeachment effort in the House is way premature and all of that. And I think that if the president is able to eke out a win in Texas, and I do think he still wins in Texas, although no predictions, I don't do that, Chad. But with straight ticket voting going away, it's probably a good strategy for Cornyn to buddy up to Trump as much as you can and have no daylight in between them, because what Cornyn's going to need is the base of the Republican Party to really turn out for him. That's Trump's base right now. And without straight ticket voting, there's a lot more people who are just going to go into the ballot box. They're going to, hit the button for President Trump and leave. And Cornyn needs them to at least hit the button for Trump and for him before they leave. Yeah. And that may mean that, Cornyn and others in the Republican Party don't have the time and energy and resources to try to put into some of the state-level races the way the Democrats are going to do, because they are really organizing, especially in places like Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, suburbs around those places as well. And so I think what the lieutenant governor is looking at in those polls, particularly on the gun issue where he's come out for expansion of background checks and all that, I think that he's looking at what may happen with Texas House races in some of those places that may be more competitive. And he's going to try, and other Republicans are going to do their best to try to shore up state-level Republican candidates. For the federal elections, I think they probably still win at that statewide level. But there are some real battlegrounds within Texas, particularly those suburban areas. And I think, two big issues are going to be impeachment of President Trump and the gun issue, as we've been talking about here on the show. So I don't know if it's as purple as some of these people are hearing or asking about, but I do think it's a lot more competitive. And we should say as we have reported here on the show, there is a concerted effort among Republicans, including the Cornyn campaign, as well as the Republican Party of Texas, and this new group called Engage Texas. They're trying to register at least 1 million new Republican voters before the elections next year. And according to their estimates, to those groups' estimates, we may see as many as 11 million people voting in Texas. And so whichever party makes it to about 5.5 million people first wins statewide elections.
Yeah, and of course, so much is going to happen between now and Election Day. And we don't even know who the nominee is going to be for the Democrats. I think that'll have an impact on which way the election goes and by how much, either Republicans win by or lose by. I mean, you've got that, the impeachment stuff. The impeachment stuff, it's going to bring out one group more than the other. And then what we don't know is who it's going to energize more. I think the Democrat fear all along from Nancy Pelosi's side has been it's going to energize the Republicans. Who knows? I guess that's up in the air.
Well, the base of the Democratic Party is sure fired up about it, and I think the developments last week with moving toward this impeachment inquiry, that may help to mollify her base in the meantime for Pelosi's base. And remember, the Speaker, she still hasn't made the members in the House vote on anything having to do with impeachment, and there's a reason for that. I mean, she's protecting the members. There are a lot of her members who are maybe not quite ready to go all the way to impeachment just yet, but they may face primary challenges in their own party from some of these sort of young gun Democrats who are all in on impeachment. So she's doing, and one of the things that some Republicans have said that I think is accurate as a criticism of Pelosi. I think it's just, an accurate statement that she's trying to protect her members from having to, put their name, on a vote one way or another just yet, but we may get there.
Scott, before I let you go, a question that came in on the text line. Mm-hmm. Do you think that either Kel Seliger or For Price runs for Thornberry's seat?
I don't think so. Based on everything that I know so far, and of course anything can change, but both of those folks in that area and could certainly, make a credible run for that seat, although I think both of them are pretty comfortable, and I don't say it as a criticism, I think they're comfortable in their roles at the Texas legislature right now. So I wouldn't look for that, but you can't rule anything out.
All right. Tell folks what they can find at Quorum Report.
We'll be covering it all for you, your state government, in real time at quorumreport.com. Sign up for our free emails there at quorumreport.com. We'll send you the news alerts about what's happening here in Texas in politics and government at quorumreport.com. Thanks, Chad.
All right. Thanks, Scott. And also you can find out all about shrimp at Quorum Report. Scott,
check it all out.
Yes, absolutely. That's Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report.